we have spent some time on this show. If you remember back when we talked about the Arthurian legends, Gawain and the Green Knight, we've dealt also with the Chanson de Roland. We talked about the Matière de Bretagne and the Matière de France, which are these two different sort of halves of the courtly chivalric literature that comes into being. In many ways, this form of literature, in its specifically romantic side, is associated with Provence, and this is a southeastern region in what is now, the modern nation of France, which is still, a French-speaking place. And the Provençal poets are very important for Dante in the kind of romantic gesture, the youthful and longing romantic gesture that they make. We talked about this with the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Andreas the chaplain. You can go back and listen to these episodes. This whole kind of rediscovery, in some cases through Ovid, the Latin poet, this whole rediscovery of romantic love as the object of elevation, of delight, of forbidden desire, right? This becomes a very important movement in art at this time. Some of it perhaps influenced also by the Muslim people who are in Spain at this juncture. And so Provençal poetry is sort of this catch-all term that we use for talking about, and the Provençal poets, for talking about this way of writing in Provençal, and this form of poetry that elevates romantic love, that rediscovers romantic love in some ways as the kind of sublime object of poetic attention. This will move and travel into Italy in many ways via Sicily. And so the Sicilian poets, right, then also become in the Sicilian sort of style of poetry, which, as its name suggests, is written in the Sicilian dialect of Italian. At this point, Italian is, as indeed in some ways it still is a multifarious language with many different dialects. But in some cases, they're really drastically different at this juncture. And as I mentioned earlier on, Dante's intervention into this is both going to be to argue that the vulgar tongue, that is the modern tongue that is spoken, can carry forth the life that was once in Latin, and in some sense even actually is just a continuation of Latin. And also in doing so, he's going to really kind of score a big blow for the Tuscan dialect eventually as the language that will become Italian, right? That will be thought of as kind of the standard language of Italian. But before all of this happens, right, you have this kind of movement in Sicily, and it's here that we really sort of locate the birth of the sonnet, the sonetto, which we've talked about before, a 14-line form associated with various different rhyme schemes. In English, we have one sort of rhyme scheme that is named after Petrarch, so it's sort of Italian one, and then one that is named after Shakespeare, which is a Shakespearean rhyme scheme. So we think of these as like the English and the Italian, but effectively we're looking here in Sicily at the kind of birth of that tradition, the tradition of romantic longing, the tradition of these little gem-like constructions that some of which we read when we read Petrarch, and the tradition of crystallizing that experience in sort of a highly artificial and yet incredibly felt little object, right? So there are a lot of sonnets in Vita Nuova. We're going to read some of them. And the question is going to become, Dante is obviously picking up this tradition, and yet he is going to transcend it or leave it behind, or even in Inferno, he's going to put in the comedy, in the Divine Comedy, he's going to put some of these poets in hell, some of them in purgatory, right? He has going to give us a lot of suggestion that even the great things of antiquity and of his recent past need to be baptized, need to be transcended. And this is associated in many ways with what is called the New Sweet Style. And this is another kind of permutation, right, of poetic tradition in Italy. And the New Sweet Style has to do with what I'm talking about, with taking this erotic longing, this physical desire, and we would now say sublimating it, although that's, I think, kind of an anachronism. It's really more like redirecting it, right, and refining it, and finding, as Plato talks about when he talks about climbing the ladder of love, right, finding what it is in your fleshly desire that points you up to the good in itself, right? And in Vita Nuova, I think we can see the sort of beginnings of that. We don't actually necessarily see its consummation, And in some ways, at the end of Vita Nuova, he's going to say, I have to kind of leave this off now and return to it another time, because the journey that he's taken through meeting Beatrice, through longing after her, through moving beyond then her death, right, and contemplating what she meant to him, he says it's going to require something else. And that something else, I think, is going to be his journey to and ultimately with Beatrice in heaven and in the visions of the Divine Comedy.